Welcome back to Hand Quilting 101. In this video, we're going to talk about how to pick a quilt design that you're going to quilt on your quilt, how to mark your quilt top, if you even need to mark, as well as show some examples of quilts that I have that either I've hand quilted or I have that my grandma or my great grandmother hand quilted. So without further ado, this is probably one of the quilts that most people will hand quilt. It's a hexagon grandmother's flower garden quilt, and it's done in the most probably basic way of quilting. It's just echo stitched inside, probably a little closer, but it should have been about a 1/4 inch from the edge of the hexagons. You don't need to mark when you quilt like this because you can usually just eyeball. You can mark it if you want, but you can just, eyeball about a 1/4 inch. If you've gotten this far in quilting, you probably have a pretty good idea of what a 1/4 inch looks like if you've pieced a top. As long as it's even. Although you'll see some of mine aren't even, like this one's really skinny and, that one's a little fatter. So, can't see that. Some of them got a little skinny and some got a little fatter. You'll see my stitches aren't super even on this one. This was one of my first quilts that I hand quilted. So, this one also uses that warm and natural batting that has scrim that I mentioned is not fun to hand quilt, which is probably why this quilt took me so long to actually complete. It's just a pain to push the needle through, as well as the way I folded the hexagons. I did squares, so there's a lot of excess fabric that I was pushing through, and that was also not fun. So that's one example. That's probably one of the most common ways of hand quilting, is just to echo stitch inside the shape that's on your quilt top. This quilt top was completed by my great grandmother. It is using, I did a crosshatch. I did the quilting, she made the quilt top. So I did a crosshatch. She hand quilted all her quilts, so that's why I felt the need to hand quilt this one. This was also, this one and the hexagon I started at the same time, so my stitches are very uneven on both of these. I did a crosshatch on the outer two squares because I wanted it to have some semblance of a border, because this quilt is already quite large, as probably about a queen size quilt, a little in between a full and a queen. I don't know if she intended on adding a border or not, but it was already large, so I decided I was going to leave it as is. So I just quilted something different on the outer two squares, units, all the way around, and to give it like the look of a border. And then in the middle part, I did Baptist fan quilting, which is quite common, I would say, as a way of hand quilting. In order to do a Baptist fan, you would start in this corner and you would go down, then you'd travel under, come back up, travel under, go down, travel under, come up. You need an odd number of fan blades. Come back up and go down. Then you travel up here and you come down, go over, come back up, you go through the quilt layers, come back down, and all the way across the quilt top, if you can see that very well. And when you reach, say you're up here, you go all the way around, so you go this way all the way, and then you come up here, go around, and you come back. So we'll say, so when you reach this point, you'd come up, you'd go down, travel under, and you'd go up. Your blade just intersects, go over, down, up, you come over, and then you just start. That's how you finish out a row, is you just butt it up to wherever your quilt line is. And this is your new corner where you'd start. So you'd come down, up, go down, up, and go down. And you just continue all the way from the outside to the inside. There's better videos explaining and diagrams, and I guess lined paper is probably not the best place to draw that out on. But because it's such a common quilt pattern, there are lots of videos out there on how to do that. So that's how I quilted this one. You can't really see it on the back because I was such a new quilter, that I kind of wanted my stitches to blend in a little because I didn't think I was going to do it quite the justice. I don't know how well you can see this, but you'll see my stitches are quite large and a little uneven, and I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. But by the end, which this is probably closer to the beginning, my stitches started getting much smaller and much nicer. One thing I will say is do not use one of these pens, chalk pens, to mark your quilt, especially the colored chalk, because it does not wash out. And I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but in person it is still the very distinct lines, and it didn't matter which color chalk I used. Maybe it shows up a little better on that one. There's yellow chalk all over this quilt top. There's pink chalk because maybe that one will show up on the yellow. There's pink, and it kind of upsets me because I've washed this quilt a few times and it doesn't wash out. And this is a top that my great-grandmother made. Also, a word of advice against pencil. I still have pencil lines. They didn't come out either. They're still all over the place on this quilt. So I will talk about which marking tools I do use and which ones have washed out for me and I haven't had an issue with. Yeah, I'm seeing orange chalk and purple chalk. Every color is in this quilt top. I think because it's quite busy enough that it's a little harder to see, but if you look close enough, it's very obviously there. This is another quilt I've done. That last one was done with polyester batting, so the stitches do show up a little better. This is done with wool. This was the first quilt I did with wool batting, and I am in love. As you can see, maybe, my stitches have gotten much, much smaller since I began. For this quilt, all I did was I wanted it to, this is called trellised flowers, is what I named this pattern. So really all I did was I wanted it to look like a trellis, those lattice trellises. So I just did diagonal lines through all the points, both directions, and then I just stitched around my flowers. Oh, let's try this one. Around the outside of the flower, and then I went on the inside of each flower because I didn't want to echo each of these little 1-inch hexagons because that was intense. And then I just did inside of the center one because I needed a little bit closer stitching. Your batting will tell you how close you need to stitch. I think this one was 3 inches, I want to say, but I don't remember. So that's all I did for this one, and you got to think about how you want it. What do you want? Do you want to add curves? If you do, the Baptist fan, that's a great way to add curves to a very angular quilt. Did you want it to look like a trellis? Did you want something just really easy? Maybe just do a crosshatch over the entire quilt. I have an example of that, sort of, almost sort of. Do you want to emphasize something? If you outline stitch something, it will make that shape pop, especially if you do a denser background quilting. than you do on the shape that you outlined. The outlined shape will pop a little bit more off of your quilt top. All right, now for another very vintage quilt. This is a quilt top that my grandmother did when she was probably a teenager. So I'm not entirely sure how. This one has no batting in it that I can tell, and it's just 2 layers of fabric. You can do that. That's totally fine. She did a crosshatch. I don't know how well this stuff shows up. She used white thread on this, so there's a crosshatch pattern in all these white squares on the background, and then she outlined her embroidery that she did, which is a lot better than I ever could do. On the border, or rather I guess in the green sashing, I don't know how she traced this, but she did this really cool braid pattern, and then on the outer 2 borders she did like an orange peel sort of design, which I thought was really cool. But this was probably done when she was young, much more talented than I was at that age. So this does, hand quilting does hold up. You don't need to worry, your quilt will not fall apart because you hand quilted it. Quite honestly, the fabric is probably going to wear out before the stitching will. So that's that one. That's a twin size, so that's really more displayed because I don't have a twin size bed to put it on than anything. Okay, here's another one from my great grandmother. This one was made for my aunt, and my aunt says this quilt was on her bed all the time, and it was washed multiple times, and it's also hand quilted. It's machine pieced, but it is hand quilted. She did hand applique the butterflies down though, which are a really cool pattern. Pull this so you can see. Little vintage butterflies. She worked in a sewing mill, so she had access to a lot of scraps. So some of these aren't quilter's cotton, and some is just scraps that she had access to. So that's pretty cool. In this one, she just quilted around the entire butterfly, as well as the antenna. And she went along the seams here, and then in these blue squares, she did a feather wreath, I want to say. I don't know how she went about doing this, but it looks like she drew a circle, and she probably drew a circle in the middle so she knew how small, like how big she wanted her feathers, because these do look like they are free-handed because they're not even all the way around. The feathers aren't, so she probably free-handed it. And then I would imagine she drew another circle around the outside and just picked a spot and went, okay, here's where my feather needs to go. We're gonna go this way, maybe this way, all the way around. But she made quilts for each of her grandchildren, so she had lots of practice on making quilts. And my mom's actually, her quilt wore out, like the fabric behind it wore out. She had one with pansies, I believe. Hers was yellow. But the fabric wore out and was frayed and gone. And there was barely the pansies left. But where it was hand quilted, that part was perfectly fine. That fabric didn't wear out. So maybe it was just these big spaces that caused it to wear out. I don't know. She also did a braided. She probably used a stencil for this, I would imagine. Although some of these don't look quite even, so I don't know. Again, she died when I was young, so I never saw her hand quilt. But she's got a braid along the border, and that's how she quilted this one. This has a very thin batting in it too, so I don't know what exactly she used. All right, and now my Christmas quilt. This is the quilt example I have where the quilting does not follow the block design. It's a secondary design. So, how did I come up with this design? Well, I kind of didn't. My boyfriend helped with this one. I drew out my block on graph paper. And then I just started doodling. Quite honestly, that's how I come up with most of my quilt patterns. This was a Christmas quilt, is a Christmas quilt, and I had finished it up, piecing the top in late November, probably a little after Thanksgiving. And the Christmas decorations had started going up around town, and one thing around here that goes up at Christmas are the Moravian stars. And I kind of wanted to look somehow like that, but I couldn't figure out how to get it to work with these triangles. And my boyfriend had this wonderful question of, well, do you have to follow the triangles? Which I had never thought of, because I had never seen an example of that. So we both doodled out the shapes and then just started drawing. What I came up with, where's the fold? Gotta find the fold. Was a star pattern. And the back comes out really cool and looks like a whole cloth quilt. So this quilt, I don't have one because I'm not currently using one and my last one dried out. I used a Clover water soluble marker to draw the pattern out, as well as chalk, because the water soluble pen is, oh, I don't have as much quilt down here. The water soluble pen is blue, so on blue fabrics or dark green fabrics it's not going to show up, so I used chalk on those. But on the water soluble pen, it is recommended, if you read the instructions on the pen, that you remove the markings within about 2 weeks. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't quilt a quilt that fast that I can get it in the washing machine and wash it out that quickly. So what I've seen recommended online, and I did this entire quilt top marked with it. I think I needed 2 pens because this is a king size quilt. And I took a wet rag, like wrung out enough that you hold it up and it's not dripping, but it is still very, very wet. And when I was done, I'd mark one block at a time. I just knew where I wanted to do a point like this, so then I marked like 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch, and I doodled it out till it looked right. So I marked one block, and when I was done quilting that one block, I took that wet rag and my quilt top was wet. Borderline going through to the back of the quilt was wet, and then at the end of the night, well, I'd take that out at the end of the night before I was done for the night, and then I just draped it over top of the back of my couch so that it could dry. And I haven't had any of the issues where people have horror stories where their lines have come back. But for light colored fabrics, I do recommend that Clover water soluble pen. It works really well. You just have to make sure you take the lines out per the recommendations on the quilt. For this quilt, I again did a crosshatch on the border. Can you sense the theme that I like crosshatching? It's easy. It looks pretty. I think it looks elegant. You can see on the back. It looks. Can you see? Really easy, really elegant. You can see my stitches are slightly larger on this one. They are getting smaller. It's something that comes with practice. And then I just did a little running stitch along through my sashing and then through this inner border. And that's all I did for this one. And then there's the quilt I'm working on now, which is my most ambitious project. And that is my Barn Star sampler. So, this quilt, I wanted the stars to pop more than I did the quilting, which seems ironic because I'm hand quilting it, so you would think I'd want the hand quilting to show. So what did I do? I did an outline stitch around each of the stars, all the way around the outside, and then I am doing about a 1-inch crosshatch through all of the background, and you can kind of see that texture. And then each of the stars will be quilted differently. This is where graph paper and doodling is your best friend. It's really easy to doodle out. I apologize for the background noise if you hear it. It's raining and I live next to a highway, so I'm sorry for that. But I doodled at lunch. I just drew my stars out and I'm like, what do I want? I wanted a lot of curves because this is a lot of angles in this quilt top. I wanted curves and I wanted it to flow and be soft and gentle. So how did I go about marking all of these patterns? So for this one, things I use to mark curves, shapes, canning rings are great, a plate, a bowl, whatever is the right size. I found that the wide mouth canning ring worked really well for me to draw a curved line around the outside. This is the part that's going to be very hard to show. Or you can freehand it if you feel confident in your freehanding abilities. And when I first started, I was not, so I drew all the lines. At the point I'm at now, I'm doing more freehanding than marking, though I am giving myself some guidelines. To mark the background, I used a Hera marker. This just puts a crease in your quilt top. It does not leave a, like, when you wash it, it'll go away. Where's the spot that I have marked? There we go. I don't know how well these are all going to show. I can see the lines, but there's just a crease line right here, and I'm just going to follow those. And when I wash it, this will all go away. I wish I had a better, maybe it'll show up on this fabric better. My thread basting stitches. But you can see right here, I just followed my coat lines. So that's all I did for those. Some of these blocks, I just did outlines on the inside, and I used different color threads. I did this little curly swirly thing, not swirly, curvy X thing. I get a lot of inspiration for what designs to use from a lot of custom long arming. I just googled long arm or custom quilting Ohio star block, or custom quilting, stars, custom quilting borders, and most of those designs can be translated into hand quilting. How they go about traveling is a little different, but pebbles probably not, or not something you're going to want to hand quilt. That's just going to hurt your fingers, I think. You could probably do a meander, but I feel like if you're going through the effort of hand quilting, why not do something special? That's my opinion. This block, I just outlined these stars, and then in here, you can't see the quilting now. I know that once it's washed, everything will tighten up more and my quilting will show better. So right now, it's not the best view. You can kind of see this is that purple star block I did some curves on. I went from here, oh boy, this is hard to see. So I followed the curve here, and then I followed the curve out to the point, and then I just drew a line, and I followed that over here, and another curve, and another curve. I just went to the points. Whatever you feel looks good for your quilt top. Like I said, this is where graph paper and doodling comes in handy. I drew out all my blocks. Every block has, that's the different block. That's the block I was just showing you. I just drew out how I wanted it to curve. This is when I was still thinking I was going to do more straight up and down rather than a crosshatch background, but just different curvy designs. I got some feathers up here. This is the design I was trying to show you that was not showing up. Outlining the block. Do some neat feather things, combining it with just outlining some stuff. Doing some swirly things. I don't know. I doodled until I found stuff that looked right. That's how I came up with these designs. So, marking a quilt. Back to that Hera marker. Where did I put that? To use the Hera marker, you need a flat surface. And I'm going to mark somewhere where I already marked because this whole background is already marked. So, you're just going to put your quilting ruler or a straight edge or whatever you have on your quilt top. Line it up, get it straight, and you just take this marker. Oh, let's try. Need this flat. This is folding. Sorry about this. You'll line it up wherever you want it. You're going to take this marker. You're going to push down, add pressure, and you're just going to slide it back and forth. And when you're done, I did the line next to, so here's my quilting line, and here's that line I just marked. And that's all you do. You just press down. This works. I haven't tried it for curves yet, but this works fantastically for straight lines. That trellis quilt that I did with the little hexagons, I had read that, oh, you can use the back of a butter knife, or like not the side with the little teeth, or like a knitting needle, and that's what I did for that one. And when I realized how I wanted to mark this one, I was like, I should just invest in this Hera marker. They're not that expensive. They really aren't. And I have to say, they lied. This is infinitely better than a butter knife or a knitting needle. And I'm really glad I bought this. This one's a Clover Hera marker. I will link this in the description. I don't get anything from these. The other thing I like to use is the Clover Chaco pen. I think that's what it's called. I've only ever used the white chalk. I have not used the other colors. I don't know if they wash out, but I do know this brushes off. I used this to do this purple, and you can't see it. So, where's the splash? We'll do these geese. Marking these. These are going to be backwards for me. You just take it and you mark your quilt. And these are just guidelines for me because it's not going to be exact. But it gives me a good idea of how to get the curve that I want. You just have to find something round that gives you the shape. So now, this one's a little high. See if you can see that. But when you're done, the chalk just brushes off. You don't have to worry about it staining your quilt top. You don't have to worry about those lingering pesky lines that this pen brings. Do not use these. I will reiterate that again. Do not use these on your quilt top. And if you do know how to get these out, please let me know. I would love to take it out of that quilt. But that's how I go about marking it. With the chalk pen, with this Clover chalk pen, I would only recommend marking the area that you're about to quilt. Maybe, I mean, in this case, I would maybe mark, you know, the geese, and if I needed to mark the pinwheels and the pinwheels, I just outlined. But like, mark the area that's going to be in your hoop at a time. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but with this, it will brush off. If you go through and mark your entire quilt top, by the time you get a quarter of the way through, most of your lines are going to be gone, and you're going to have to mark them again anyway. So I don't think that's worth it, if you ask me. If you want to keep marking your quilt over and over, go for it. It's great practice. But that's how I mark my quilt top. I doodle to come up with quilt patterns and designs and what I want to do. And like I said, in my next video, I will show you how to actually do the hand quilting and I'll show you how to do straight lines. I'll show you how to do curves, how to bury the knot, how to make a knot, and how to do that rocking stitch, which is something that is very useful when hand quilting and much, much easier than stab stitching, which I'll explain that as well. So thank you for watching.